Here on Game Changers, we're all about helping you stay ahead of pharmacy practice. But why stop at listening? You can earn CE credit for this episode and hundreds more by visiting CEimpact.com and logging into your account or creating a new one. Get credit, get inspired, and make your learning count. Hey CEimpact subscribers! Welcome to the Game Changers Clinical Update Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Maynard. And today we'll be chatting about GLP-1 agonists, or glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonists, but much easier to say GLP-1s. So these GLP-1s continue to be a really hot topic among clinicians, patients, and the media. It seems like every day there's a new headline about these meds. So on today's podcast, we're going to chat about some of the latest updates that are impacting our patients and our practices. And to help us get up to speed on some of those recent developments, and what pharmacists need to know, I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Christy Schumacher as our expert guest today. So welcome, Christy.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Excellent. And Christy, I know you've got a lot of experience in this area, so maybe you could share a little bit about your background and your current role and why you're interested in this topic with our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been working now for about, 16 or 17 years. I work at Midwestern University's College of Pharmacy in Downers Grove, Illinois. I'm also a clinical pharmacist at Northwestern Medicine. And for the entirety of my career, I've actually been an ambulatory care pharmacist working in primary care clinics, first specializing in cardiology and then branching into diabetes. So a lot of CKM type management. And so in general, helping people with diabetes, helping people with cardiovascular disease. And really now we're seeing GLP-1s be a game changer for everyone, especially people with diabetes, people with obesity or that are overweight. So they've been great to work with in clinical practice. We have new tools coming out all the time to really help us take better care of patients. So I use a lot of these in clinical practice, and I'm really excited to be here today to share some knowledge and what I've learned.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm super excited to hear your best practices and lessons learned because I'm sure you've got a lot of them to share. You know, you mentioned an acronym there, CKM, and I'm not sure everyone's familiar with that. So could you, I think it ties in well with our discussion. So if you wouldn't mind just explaining that for those who might not be familiar.
Absolutely. So cardiovascular kidney metabolic syndrome. So it's a new term that was created in 2023 by the American Heart Association. They released a presidential advisory. So if you're not familiar, I'd recommend just doing a search for the 2023 presidential advisory on CKM syndrome. But really, it talks about starting early with stage 1 CKM, just being people with overweight or obesity, and starting to manage early. And that would be, of course, for GLP-1s might play a role. And it preventing the progression to cardiovascular disease, preventing the progression to diabetes and other chronic conditions. So it really does start to basically encourage earlier therapy, earlier interventions to help keep people more healthy.
Excellent. Well, like I say, I that ties in so well, and it's just so interesting how diabetes management has evolved, you know, from beyond focusing on glucose and this whole cardiometabolic, that CKM concept is just something that I think we're all still maybe wrapping our heads around a little bit. So I'm really glad you clarified that. But I do think that ties in well with where we wanted to start with one of the updates today, which is the approval and launch of oral semaglutide for weight loss specifically. So we had injectables for weight loss for GLP-1s previously, and we also had an oral semaglutide for diabetes. But more recently, now we have the oral semaglutide for weight loss specifically. And so I imagine that's probably already making a splash in your practice. I think it's something people are probably really interested in. So maybe you could share a little update on what this product is for those who may not be as familiar and what its impact on weight is, what your experience has been so far with it.
Yeah, good question. I mean, of course, I manage a lot of people. My primary role is managing people with diabetes. So historically, I've had a lot of experience with oral semaglutide marketed as Rybelsus, where now we have oral semaglutide marketed as the Wegovy pill. So when we think about oral semaglutide in general, really this is Rybelsus. So if we're familiar with this as clinicians, pharmacists, whatever your role is, the Wegovy pill is really just rebranded for weight loss. And it's our old Rybelsus that we're so familiar with. Now, I will say there is small differences because if you think about oral semaglutide marketed as Rybelsus, it's available as a 3 milligram tablet, 7 milligram tablet, and 14 milligram tablet. And when we think about the Wegovy pill or oral semaglutide, I guess marketed as the Wegovy pill. Sorry, just trying to balance all these brand names here. But in general, when we think about the tablets for the Wegovy pill, they're 1.5, 4 milligrams, and 9 milligram tablets with the opportunity to go up to a 25 milligram tablet. So you will notice the dosing is a little bit different. And we'll probably see the Ribelsis tablets as well start to shift over to that dose
Hmm.
because what it is they actually improve the absolute bioavailability. So one of the big issues with oral semaglutide or Ribelsis that we saw with people with diabetes is we know that it has the snack protein around it. It really gets disintegrated easily in the stomach if we're not careful. So we have to counsel patients to take it with the smallest sip of water possible, wait 30 minutes, then go ahead and eat, drink, take the rest of their medications. We still have those same counseling points with the Wegovy pill as well, but the absolute bioavailability is a little bit better with the Wegovy tablet as opposed to the Ribelsis tablets because it went from 0.4 to 1%, I believe, with Ribelsis to now about up to 1 to 2% more bioavailable with the Wegovy tablet. So they are trying to improve the overall oral bioavailability of it. But still, when you think about these new Wegovy pills, even though the doses are slightly different and it is more bioavailable, it's only really still 1 to 2%. So we still have to ensure those same counseling points. Everything really stays the same as oral semaglutide as Ribelsis. That 30 minutes with this, I usually say with the smallest sip of water possible that they could basically ingest to take the pill. It
Hmm.
says 4 ounces or 120 milliliters, but when you tell a person that, what does that really
Right.
mean? So when I counsel, I usually just say with the smallest sip of water and then
Sure.
wait 30 minutes to eat, drink, and take other medications. So I think in general, it's not necessarily that new to a lot of us that have been managing diabetes for a while, because really it's very similar to it is Ribelsis basically, just in a new
Yeah.
formulation. And
Yeah.
it actually, the 25 milligram tablet is still the original formulation.
What do you mean by that exactly? What do you mean by the original or for the
Oh, because the tablets are 1.5, 4, and 9, they're like the new, slightly more bioavailable
yeah,
formulation.
I see. Okay.
The 25 milligram tablet is actually still the original formulation.
Okay. Okay, got it. Um Yeah, a couple of things to clarify there. I think it's great that you're calling out that oral semaglutide has been available for diabetes. Now we have it approved for weight loss. There are the different strengths available. So for the oral semaglutide Rybelsus product, that was the 3, 7, 14 strengths available, and
Mhm.
then the Wegovy oral semaglutide for weight loss is 1.5, 4, 9, and 25. I did see something about, looking at the 25 milligram strength for diabetes potentially getting approved for that too. So that might also come into play here. And then, but as you said, it is the same administration considerations. I love how you said just take it with a sip of water because no more than 4 ounces, but
What
it's
does
just
that mean? Yeah.
take it with enough water to swallow, but don't
Yeah.
don't overdo it. Um, so I love that counseling point. And yeah, we do need to make sure if a patient's interested in the oral product, making sure they're taking it properly so they get the most benefit from it. So I'm glad you drove that point home. One other thing to mention, sort of along these lines, is that there is an oral semaglutide for diabetes, basically the Rybelsus. There's going to be a rebranding to Ozempic, in part because we know the injectable semaglutide, Ozempic, has been available, and I think there's been some concern that patients may not have realized that there was also an oral semaglutide for diabetes Rybelsus available because they had different names. So we're going to see some alignment in the products as well. So the oral semaglutide and the injectable semaglutide specifically for diabetes will now both be going by the Ozempic name instead. And so all of that to say, I think there's potential for errors and confusion here, especially if people are switching. And so I don't know if you've run into that at all in your practice or any thoughts about how to help mitigate some of that concern when patients are switching between formulations, either injectable to oral or between these oral forms.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And especially too, as cost continues to change, we see people switching products, especially formularies as well. So
Mhm.
we do get quite a few questions about switching. I actually got a question about switching semaglutide and tirzepatide yesterday. So we get these
Okay.
questions
Yep.
all the time.
Yep.
And really it's patient specific. Honestly, when I look at it, how well is the person tolerating the medication? Is it
Mhm.
someone that's having severe GI upset for the first week that they're on it and then it goes away as they get used to the dose, or is it someone that struggles with GI upset every dose? or is it someone that has no GI upset at all? Because if
Mhm.
someone has no GI upset at all, then when I switch, I'm comfortable at switching over to a higher dose.
Okay.
And so you really have to start having patient-centered conversations because in general, let's say someone wanted to switch to the Wegovy semaglutide pill, then and they were already on injectable Wegovy, let's say at 2.4, if they were doing well on it, then maybe you could just switch them over to the 9 milligram tablet and then titrate up to 25
Hmm.
milligrams. So I'm
Hmm.
usually actually a little bit more aggressive, I think, with my crosses when we're switching products based on how well they tolerate the medication in general.
Okay.
So I don't actually have a set algorithm. I feel like for how I do it, our colleagues always
Okay.
ask, how do you decide?
Yeah.
Like, do you always, even when switching to injectable tirzepatide, do you always go back down to 2.5 or back to 5? And it's like, well, if they were tolerating a really high dose of semaglutide really well and had no GI upset, no nausea, no vomiting every time they took a dose, then I'd feel more comfortable just switching over to tirzepatide 10 if they want to keep using it for weight loss and then titrate up 12 and a half and 15. So
Hmm.
in general, I think every time I switch over, it's really a conversation with the patient
Hmm.
about how well they're tolerating the medication. And then I decide, do I want to start a lower dose and go up slowly or a moderate dose and go up?
Hmm.
So
Okay. Yeah, makes
yeah, I
sense.
don't know if I have a great answer for that. I think it really is patient specific because
Sure.
as you know, some patients feel great on these and other patients have not great first
Right.
experiences. So it depends on the person.
Right. And that's a great point too, making sure that the patient, especially depending on how they did with their titration too, initially with the original drug they might have been on, we don't want to turn them off of the drug altogether if they're not having a good experience. So absolutely getting that patient-centered, approach is critical. So I'm glad you shared that perspective. I think also, the thing that comes to my mind is about errors. Like if the prescriptions are coming over, if there's any change in therapy, always double checking with the patient too to make sure that they're getting what they intended, that this was supposed to be a switch. Because I could see, especially as that Rybelsus to Ozempic name change is happening, and as people are maybe switching between oral and injectable or vice versa, just cross communications, can happen. And
Yeah.
so, just making sure we're communicating with patients when those changes are happening.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be so important for us as pharmacists, especially as we go from oral semaglutide Rybelsus to the Ozempic pill, because now we're talking about with Rybelsus, we have 3 milligrams, 7 milligrams, and 14 milligrams. And that's going to switch to 1.5, 4, and 9 milligrams. So when people come into their pharmacies or into your clinic or whatever work setting that you're in, they're
Yeah.
going to have a lot of questions. Why is my
Yeah.
dose different? Or, you have someone on 3 milligrams of Rybelsus that goes to 1.5, for example, of the Ozempic pill. Every time you think about doses, people have, doses in their mind as
Hmm.
so
Right. Great point.
am I getting less strength? Like I even think about it when I switch potentially even ARBs, like low sartan 100 to olmesartan 20, for example. People are like, wait, what? That's so much less drug. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
So we have to think about those counseling points too, so people aren't inappropriately doubling up on Ozempic
Yeah.
pills when they get it. Like two 1.5s is a three. I need to be on the
Exactly.
three.
That's a
So
great point. I didn't
yeah.
even think of that. And you're right that the perception of doses varies so widely by patient too. They might think, oh, well, I'm not getting as potent of a product, so I
Yeah.
need to make taking more to make sure I get the same effect. Yeah, excellent point. In terms of the weight loss expected with the oral semaglutide, I guess with the one approved for weight management specifically, what kind of experience have you had with that, and what do you usually tell patients to expect, and how long do you expect them to take to see that effect?
Yeah, great question. I mean, some people, first off, again, for me, there's just so many different variables. I think when we look at clinical trials, we have like set numbers, like 11% weight loss, 15% weight loss, but really it depends, in my opinion, how much weight does the person have to lose? If you have a female that's maybe, 5'7", 160 pounds, they're not going to lose, 50 pounds. But if you have someone that's 300 pounds, they could lose a substantial amount of weight. So I think the first thing you need to think about when talking to people about these medications is realistic goals. The study, when you look at some of these newer studies, the average weight is over 100 kilograms. So for someone that's only 70, 80 kilograms, they might
Mm-hmm.
not see the same effect as what you saw in clinical trials. So
Mm-hmm.
you might not see as much weight loss just because there's not as much weight to lose, which is
Mm-hmm.
completely fine. So I think in general, just a lot of counseling around these in terms of like what to expect. I will say too, it's interesting. There's about 10% of the population that just doesn't respond at all to these. So I will have patients that just don't lose any weight on these
Mm-hmm.
agents. Sometimes and especially in diabetes too, they'll like improve their A1C, but not a lot. But then you'll also have people where maybe their A1C was 13 or 14, and then you start one and all of a sudden their A1C is 6. So there's also a different level of response, probably depending on
Mm-hmm.
the person's basically incretin deficiency at baseline and all sorts of other genetic factors that play a role too. So I guess and to summarize all that, lots of different things to think about. But when you're counseling, I think set realistic expectations. I also think it's important too, and how much weight could be lost also depends on how much lifestyle they're using with it. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
are they going to change their diet? Does it help them curb their appetite? Are they ready to eat smaller, more healthy meals? Are they starting to exercise with it to prevent that muscle wasting that we sometimes worry about? So there's a lot of different things that can play a huge role in terms of expectations for weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
So I usually will just start with, how much weight you lose is really how much weight do you want to lose? How much effort do you want to put into this? Do you want to also maintain a healthy diet, lifestyle, get adequate sleep, go to the gym? What are your goals in general? So I think that can also play a role in how much weight you'll see people lose.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we've seen people lose, 100, 150 pounds if they've had a lot of weight to lose. So yeah, it really just depends on the person and how motivated they are to just kind of change their life.
Well, and I think for a lot of people, what we're seeing is that these, even if they were doing lifestyle changes previously, the medications are giving them maybe you can speak to that a little bit. If
Yeah,
people
the
who
jump
have been,
start. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, that jump
Yeah.
start. Maybe you can speak to how it works for that and how what kind of effect you've seen with that because it can be so frustrating. I think when people have tried their whole lives to be losing weight and have been on this cycle and just nothing has ever worked, and now people are seeing effects. So yeah, speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually love these agents early on in therapy. Excuse me. I think they do provide, I call it the jump start. So I actually always start them early on. Like, yes, absolutely, everyone should see a nutritionist if they have type 2 diabetes or a type 1 or type 2 diabetes, any sort of diabetes. But I do recommend that people do still see a nutritionist, do work on exercise. However, sometimes people just don't even know where to start. And they
Mhm.
also just need mentally that encouragement of I can do this. So they start taking whether it be the Wegovy pill or one of the injectable medications for weight loss, and they start to lose weight. Well, now you have less weight on your joints, so it's easier to go out for a
Right,
walk now. It's
right,
easier to go to the gym. You're starting to get more motivated mentally because you're just like, okay, I am starting to lose weight. I'm feeling
right,
better about my image. I'm ready to go to the gym and try to start working out. There's less stress on my joints because I have less weight on my joints. And honestly, we see that even with step 9 with osteoarthritis, it showed a benefit, subcutaneous semaglutide in osteoarthritis. I mean, we're starting to see different benefits just from the weight loss, people kind of getting up, getting going. So I would say I start these early, and I definitely feel like you can use them as a tool to get people motivated to want to further do lifestyle interventions.
yeah, yeah, that's excellent, and glad to hear that perspective too, because it can be so frustrating, and for people to start seeing a benefit can be so empowering, and as you say, really help them then take additional steps to improve their lifestyle. So that's great. I do wonder from patient care process perspective, if you have a new patient with diabetes or obesity, if we just think about those two sort of conditions, and you're sort of thinking about how all the GLP-1s stack up now that we have this oral product for weight loss specifically, what goes through your mind in terms of that patient decision-making process and what are pros and cons? When would you think about tirzepatide or Mounjaro or Zepbound versus the semaglutide or any other GLP-1? What was your decision-making process there?
Yeah, great question. I mean, so in terms of weight loss, I still, even though the oral pill is available, I'm still a big proponent of the once weekly injectables. I actually prefer those for people with diabetes too, even when I manage them, just because I do think it's a lot easier to take a shot 1 day a week than it
Mm,
is to go through these different administration requirements.
mm,
So, and I think that is a reason why people honestly kind of forgot about Ribelsis is because
mhm,
it's really hard for someone to wake up every morning, take the pill, wait 30 minutes, eat or drink, especially we know a lot of people have concomitant hypothyroidism or different things where they have to take pills such as levothyroxine, or if you have osteoporosis, maybe you have to
mhm,
take alendronate and then think about those administration requirements. So it really depends what's realistic for the person. Now, I think because the Wegovy pill is starting at a lower cost set point, it's going to gain more traction and more
true.
popularity
Yeah.
because it is
Okay.
becoming a little bit, I have to say, I guess, more affordable than some of the injectables. But I think if you have someone that has a lot of weight to lose, I still do gravitate more towards the injectable. I
Mhm.
think the Wegovy pill is probably great for that person where their BMI is maybe like, I don't know, 27 to 35. They're kind of in that, I hate to say like lower overweight range, but
Yeah, sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
they don't have
Yep.
quite as much weight that they want to lose.
Yep.
I think
Yep.
when you start to see people with BMIs over 35, you really, and I know we're not supposed to be thinking BMI numbers anymore, but the basically the more obese person, really for success, I would start on an injectable. I think the
Okay.
Wegovy pill is going to be great for those people that are kind of in that like slightly overweight, obese range where they just need a little bit more weight to lose and they want to do a pill. They're not really open to a shot. So
Okay.
that would kind of be where the population that I would use it in. And then, of
Okay.
course, you have to make sure they can do the administration requirements
Sure.
because
Yeah.
I will say we didn't talk about this earlier, but if you have someone come in and it's not working, like we'll have people come in and they'll say Ribelsis doesn't work. And I'll be like, okay, that's the first thing in my mind is check the administration requirements. It does work, you just have to take it correctly.
Mhm.
So if
Mhm.
patients say
Mhm.
it doesn't work, then I mean, sure, they
Mhm.
could be part of that non-responder
That's
population.
exactly what I was
But
thinking.
okay, but I would say it's probably has something to do with the administration.
At least first and foremost, rule that out. But when you did
Yeah.
mention I think up to 10% was what you said that don't respond, I was like, huh, how many of those are actually problems with administration or adherence or whatever, that could be contributing to that? And sure, but definitely important point to rule that out first. Um, in terms of so that's good to know your experience with the injectable versus oral as well, and sort of thinking about who would be potential better candidates for injectable even between the GLP-1s, the injectables, let's say, do you sort of have a similar thought process in terms of the weight intended to lose, desire to lose, and thinking about tirzepatide perhaps for that versus the semaglutide or a different GLP-1? How does that sort of stacking up happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our practice, so because I mentioned I do manage a lot of people with diabetes, I like to get a GLP-1 on board regardless. So the first thing I think about if I have, let's say, an individual that doesn't really want to lose any weight, but I do want a GLP-1 still for like kidney protection, decreased inflammation, cardiovascular protection, I'll actually go towards dolaglutide.
Okay.
Trulicity, yeah.
Okay.
So it's a little bit weaker. And we know the 1.5 milligram dose reduces cardiovascular risk. We saw that in the Rewind trial. So actually, if someone's like, I don't really want to lose a lot of weight, but
Mm-hmm.
I know I want to use a GLP-1 for cardiovascular protection,
Mm-hmm.
that I might
Mm-hmm.
just actually just stick with Trulicity dolaglutide
Mm-hmm.
1.5 milligrams weekly.
Okay.
Now, if someone is kind of in that mid-range, I'll do Ozempic or subcutaneous semaglutide. And then if someone comes in, they have a lot of weight to lose, they're really like, I need to lose this weight, then I'll just go straight to tirzepatide or Mounjaro. So I have to sit down with people. What's realistic? How much weight do you want to lose? I will say too, sometimes we look at someone's profile and just assume they want to lose a lot of weight. I have had patients that don't want to lose weight, that don't want to get down. They'll tell me, sometimes they'll even just say, I don't want to look like you. And it's like, okay, that's fine. That's fine. But yeah, so I think again, we have to meet the patient where they are. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So I think in general, it's like, what are their weight loss goals?
Um,
Where do they want to be? I think if it's, less weight loss, then you look at something like dolaglutide, 1.5 milligrams weekly. If it's kind of like moderate, I'm not sure. Maybe you gravitate more towards subcutaneous semaglutide and then titrate up and see how well they do. And then if someone wants to lose a ton of weight, then you just go with tirzepatide. And then I know we'll talk about this later, but if there's plateau on tirzepatide 15, then you could potentially do
mm.
one of the new ones, such as retatrutide, which would be a triple agonist. So we've got stuff in the pipeline too for people that are starting to plateau that want even more weight loss. So
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for sorting through those a little bit more. And that's interesting perspective too on the dulaglutide side. The older GLP-1s are not necessarily older and worse. They
Yeah,
have their own role too.
they
So
still protect you from cardiovascular
that's
disease.
right. And I appreciate you calling that out too, that the kidney cardiovascular benefits of some of these also is an important consideration. And like you say, a reason why you probably go to these early on in your patients with diabetes. Um, Chrissy, you did sort of allude to the potential benefits, not only in the potentially losing weight and allowing the patient to exercise better and continue on their lifestyle changes, but you also alluded specifically to osteoarthritis as an outcome that has been looked at with semaglutide and potentially improved. So let's transition into another sort of update, which is the various indications we're seeing with these GLP-1s now. We've seen FDA-approved indications for other conditions beyond diabetes and weight management with sleep apnea, the kidney benefits, the cardiovascular benefits, the metabolic associated steatohepatitis MASH for some of these. And so we're seeing just a lot of additional approvals. I heard a colleague say like they're going to be approved for hypertension and all these different things. So can you speak a little bit to some of these expanded indications, what we're seeing, where you see these going, and why we're seeing benefit in some of these other uses? What's the research leading towards?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because a lot of these expanded indications do have to do with weight loss. But what we're seeing too is possibly this decrease in inflammatory component, really
Okay.
also contributing to some of these benefits. So it's been interesting. I mean, you look at the studies and they have so many different studies in so many different disease states. So we have Surmount OSA, which is the participants with moderate to severe obstructive sleep apnea. And we know that tirzepatide really improved the indices for people with sleep apnea in addition to using their CPAP. So we know that some of the weight loss with sleep apnea has been really helpful. And I do think in general, I mean, this is a whole nother day conversation, but sleep apnea is really underdiagnosed and underscreened
Mhm.
for. I think
Mhm.
it's hard to get people to want to go somewhere and do a sleep study. So in general, knowing that some of this is going to help with something like obstructive sleep apnea, we have semaglutide for MASH in the Essence trial, which showed basically benefit in those with MASH and moderate and advanced liver fibrosis. It improved histologic results for that. So we have great data now. Well, I guess one really great randomized control trial, the Essence trial, looking at subcutaneous semaglutide in people with MASH. Overall, we've had recent studies looking at these different agents in people with heart failure preserved ejection fraction. So it is kind of interesting. We haven't had great data yet in heart failure reduced ejection fraction. That's been a more of a controversial population. But we do have for heart failure preserved ejection fraction, we have like the STEP-HFpEF trial with subcutaneous semaglutide. We also have the Summit trial with tirzepatide showing benefit in that heart failure preserved ejection fraction population. Again, patients benefiting from the weight loss, but also in that HFpEF population, we have decreased inflammation, we have improvement in nitric oxide, which improves overall endothelial function, that decrease in body weight and visceral adiposity, improvement in ventricular compliance, decreased fibrosis, overall decreasing filling pressures and improving diastolic relaxation. So we're seeing a really like a fascinating benefit as well in the heart failure preserved ejection population, especially or well, I guess the obesity-driven heart failure preserved
Mhm.
ejection population. I mean, there's so many different areas we're seeing benefit in peripheral vascular disease, kidney disease with the FLOW trial. And then, as you mentioned, I keep talking here, but because there's just so many different things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hypertension, I mean, it's so interesting because there is no dedicated hypertension trial. But if you think about the hypertension guidelines that, and this has been in there forever, for every one
Mm.
kilogram of weight loss, if you look at the lifestyle recommendations in the hypertension guidelines, it says every kilogram of weight loss, your blood pressure will lower 1 millimeter of mercury. So if someone loses 10 kilograms on one of these agents, like theoretically, their blood pressure should go down 10 millimeters of mercury, 10 points. So if
Mhm.
you lose 20, it goes down 20. So we are seeing this in clinical practice too, where you start these, people start to lose weight. And it's not just about managing weight, it's we have to start de-escalating therapy as well. So we de-escalate
Mhm.
insulin a lot, we de-escalate blood pressure medications. In general, cholesterol medications usually kind of stand still. We always want our patients on a statin that need to be on one. But I do think it's it's kind of something we don't think about is that weight loss does cause blood pressure reduction. So we need to start thinking about, do we need to de-escalate antihypertensive therapy? So a
Mhm.
lot of different things to think about here with some of the benefits of these.
hmm that's a really important point about de-escalation because these meds are meant to be used long term. I know that's, I think, pretty well established now, but maybe s- still some confusion around the idea of obesity, overweight being a chronic condition that needs long-term management. It's not something you're necessarily going to stop, and therefore that could affect the other meds that you're taking, and those meds may need adjustment. Do you think that's a fair statement? Is that how you approach it?
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, yes, like obesity, in my opinion, is a chronic disease. I do think these agents work really great in managing it. I think very similar to someone with diabetes as well. There's all sorts of other things you manage. You don't just manage diabetes, and in
Right,
my opinion, you don't
right.
just manage obesity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's so many other things we have to think about and all
Mm-hmm.
the added benefits that go with it. So when I pick medications now for people, like which one is going to help me improve the person's overall profile is what
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about. So when I start these, I'm thinking about protecting their kidneys, protecting their heart, as well as weight loss, diabetes management, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
If they have peripheral vascular disease, just improving their walk distance. We saw in the STRIDE trial with subcutaneous semaglutide just little differences where you're starting to see benefit with these agents, protecting them from developing MASLD, so the liver disease there, the metabolic associated steatotic liver disease. I mean, we know these have been shown to treat it, but also what you're seeing is if you put these on early on, our patients aren't even getting it. Like our FIB-4 scores are going down because we're screening those every visit. And what we're seeing is basically protecting people with diabetes and potentially overweight and obesity from even developing it. Now, that data is not out. That's just something I'm observing in our
Sure,
clinic.
sure.
But I do think like starting these early, you're protecting against future other chronic complications that you're not even thinking about. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many just benefits down the road that you're protecting people from.
Yeah, super interesting. And just how all of those conditions do often go hand in hand. And it goes back to your CKM abbreviations.
Yeah.
Like, nice to tie that all together. One of the other indications that I think has gotten some interest or a little bit of buzz lately is about the potential use for GLP-1s in alcohol or substance use disorder. And I'm very interested in the theory behind that. You talked about inflammation and some of these other markers, but what is the potential benefit of benefit for a GLP-1 agonist in substance use disorders? Have you seen that in your practice? Or what do you know about that?
Yeah, no, it has been interesting because these GLP-1s actually kind of work on reducing the consumption and warding properties of various substances. So this includes, you'll see
Okay.
alcohol, opioids, nicotine, as well as psychostimulants. So basically GLP-1s, they're mediated through the modulation of reward pathways. So they also help with stress regulation, cognitive function in the central nervous system, and then obviously a host of functions in the periphery. So we don't have a lot of robust clinical studies yet. But what we're starting to see for a variety of different things like alcohol, opioids, nicotine, they're also reducing cravings for substance use, which has been interesting. So I think that's also something to keep an eye out for. There's not great data yet on it. But in general, we do see people that'll say like, oh, I want to smoke less now that I'm on it,
Mhm.
which is interesting too, that I notice it more with smoking than drinking. But in general, I will say like our patients do want to smoke less, which has been nice. And in general,
Yeah.
when you're trying to get someone to quit smoking, I mean, the biggest thing, right, is then they gain weight, which is why they don't
Right,
want to quit
right.
smoking. So I think this is actually, I
Right.
know we talk about it with substance use disorders, we see decrease in alcohol cravings and in general, just cravings altogether. But I think it's also going to be a useful tool for smoking cessation, like preventing that rebound weight gain, decreasing the nicotine cravings. I think it can be a great supplement as well for smoking cessation. Again, not a lot of robust data yet, but the way things are going, I wouldn't be surprised if things start popping up in the literature.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, interesting. I think it's one of those things just to be aware of and keep an eye on some of the publications, research coming out, because as you say, I think they have sort of all these downstream potential benefits that maybe we aren't
Yeah.
recognizing until we see them more in the real world and in practice, and we get all this real world data, and that can generate new research, to start. So, yeah, very interesting. Um, what do you think about, like, let's think about crystal ball sort of predictions here. And what do you think are some of the Outside of the indications potentially coming, where do you think are some of the next steps that we might see with GLP-1s in general? New drugs or new products? What are some of the forthcoming announcements that we're expecting to see with some GLP-1s?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big one that's probably coming that people are pretty excited about is the other oral GLP-1 receptor agonist, so orforglipron, which is made by Eli Lilly or marketed by Eli Lilly, and it's a non-peptide small molecule GLP-1 receptor agonist. So what that means is non-peptide. It has a higher bioavailability and can be administered without restrictions on food or water
Mm,
intake. So you're going to see an easier administration compared to oral semaglutide. So I think this one is going to be probably the most interesting one to come to the market. So in
mm,
they did a trial called the Achieve One trial, for example, and people lost in the 36 milligram dose group about 7.6% change in body weight. And I know Eli Lilly already has planned to seek regulatory approval for weight loss already and will do diabetes this year in 2026. So that one I think is going to be exciting on the horizon. Now, that being said, it does have higher bioavailability. It'll be interesting to see as it kind of rolls out into the real world setting if there are more side effects with it. Do people have more GI side effects? Some of that started to show up in clinical trials, but I always find our patients are quite a bit different than even what's reported in
hmm
clinical trials. And
hmm
as I mentioned, everyone responds to these so differently. So
hmm
I am excited to see the oral GLP-1 orforglipron come out and just see how, if it's a game changer or if people are like, the shots still work better and we still
hmm
stick on the injectable agent. So that one I think will be interesting. Another one that I'm also interested in is cangrelinotide semaglutide. So we call it CagriSema. And so cangrelinotide is a long-acting amylin analog, and it binds to the calcitonin receptor and all three of the amylin receptors, and it helps with reducing food intake and weight loss. So one of the things I do think, and we'll talk about, they're coming out with new doses too of subcutaneous semaglutide, potentially even up to 7.2 milligrams. But
Mm,
one thing I'll probably still gravitate more towards is combining different agents that all work together in a complementary manner to provide greater weight loss. So I am excited about CagriSema as well and the potential to provide further weight loss for those on semaglutide that need a little extra benefit.
okay.
Yeah, and then another option is retatrutide. So this is also in the pipeline coming out in the next year or two for weight loss and hopefully people with diabetes, but it's a GIP, GLP-1, just like tirzepatide, but now you
Right.
add on the glucagon receptor agonist to that too. So this is our new triple agent, retatrutide. So that one will be interesting too. So if someone again plateaus with tirzepatide, you could potentially step them up to retatrutide if they could tolerate it. So that one also in the pipeline, which will be interesting. And then actually, I find this one the most fascinating because it's a once monthly GLP-1 receptor agonist. It's known as Maritide. It's a long-acting one, so it just has to be administered every month because the half-life is about 21 days.
Wow.
And it combines GLP-1 agonism with GIP receptor antagonism. So when we think about tirzepatide, for example, that's a GLP-1 agonist with a GIP agonist. And this one, the once monthly Maritide, is actually a GIP receptor antagonist. So I find that one to be fascinating and really just tells me we don't know quite what GIP does yet
Mm,
in terms of
mm,
benefits that we can have an antagonist and an agonist portfolio out there. So those are some of the ones
mhm.
that I'm excited about coming along the pipeline that I think are getting pretty close to the finish line.
Yeah, it's just sort of fascinating to see how much, like you say, is in the pipeline and coming down even in the next year. And like I said, at the beginning, that we are seeing headlines about these drugs every single day, regardless. And so more is just on the way. We're gonna have to have you back, in a few months when all this
Yeah.
starts to come out. Um, One other hot topic that relates, I think, to some of the products that you mentioned, actually, that are not yet FDA approved, are the regulatory issues coming up with some of
Yeah.
these GLP-1s too. We've seen some FDA announcements about compounding and concerns around that. So, what is your take on all that, and how do you help patients navigate some of those concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully some of the now direct to consumer marketing has decreased people's desire, we'll call it, to purchase compounded products. So I mean, the FDA allows it if there's a shortage, for example. However, even when there was a shortage of these, I mean, there's still a lot of questions. So, okay, so semaglutide's in shortage. So how do these compounding companies even have it to begin with? Well, because they're using salt forms of semaglutide, they're not using the regular form of semaglutide, the base form in the FDA products. They're using these salt forms, so semaglutide sodium, semaglutide acetate. So you have to think to yourself, okay, this isn't even the FDA approved product that was being used in the shortages. So I definitely was not a proponent of that. So I tried my best to, lengthen out dosage regimens or like intervals between doses and do different tips and tricks to kind of get around different drug shortages. Because, I mean, the FDA doesn't recommend it. The American Diabetes Association definitely doesn't recommend it. They don't find it safe. So I stay away from the compounded products. It's definitely something if someone says they're using a compounded product, then I try to steer them more towards, okay, let's get you on track with the regular FDA approved product made by the manufacturer so I can ensure safety and efficacy. Because we've also had some horror stories where, someone used a compounded tirzepatide and had 20 gallstones, had to have their gallbladder removed because it was starting to necrotize. I mean, you hear these like horror stories. We see these horror stories, unfortunately, with compounded products because we just can't ensure safety and efficacy with them. So I actually never recommend them in clinical practice. And if a patient comes in and they are using one, I do immediately switch it to the FDA approved product because they scare me that they're not. And even if it is from a reputable company, I do still have some reservations about compounding these, especially if they're using the salt forms and not the base forms.
Yeah, and there is, I mean, there's a whole FDA page on compounding GLP-1s and considerations with them. And as you say, there have been adverse events reported. Part of it is contamination issues or counterfeit issues, but also the salt form, as you said, or even some of these unapproved products like I'm forgetting the R word,
Oh,
the one you talked about.
retatrutide, yeah. I mean, they're
Yeah, I think
compounding it. It's not even available
it's
yet,
not
but
approved
somehow,
yet. So, I
yeah.
think the importance, for anyone who is compounding, making sure that you're following all the federal regulations and laws around that and recommendations and the recommendations from ADA if appropriate. So just it is one of those messy areas where unfortunately it can be something that gets patients into trouble. And there are a lot of, because there's not a shortage now, there's a lot of options available. So
Yeah.
good to be aware of.
Yeah, and actually, I think the pill is going to kind of mitigate any
True.
potential
Yeah.
shortage issues, honestly. We've got, even now we have the tirzepatide quick pen. So we're getting also too, a lot of the shortages is due to
Right.
all the delivery devices, right? So now we have these medications and different delivery devices, like the tirzepatide quick pen just came out. Now we're getting more tablets, we're getting more options. So
Yeah. Right.
I do think we're not going to really have to worry about a shortage. There's going to be something that we can use that'll be
Yeah.
available. So.
Yep, absolutely. So we've talked about a lot of really exciting things, like you say, lot more to come. What do you think in general are some of the most, maybe the most top barriers that you see with these drugs in general, and how you help patients work through that, or top counseling tips? What are some of the take-home messages that pharmacists should be aware of when supporting patients with these meds, whether starting them out because we may have more patients starting, or in terms of maintenance? What are some of the key things that you like to drive home to your patients?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the top barrier is cost, right? So
Yeah.
even though some of these have direct to consumer options now, I mean, if you look at the price tag, it's still not affordable for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And then now, unfortunately, a couple of the companies too have removed the patient and persistence program from Medicare patients now that the Medicare coverage has changed. So thinking about for those people, recommending the M3P program and just spacing out the copay throughout the year. So I think in general, probably the biggest barrier to using some of these is cost. And then the second biggest barrier would be tolerability.
Hmm.
So in general, I think the most important thing is when you start one of these, it's not just like, okay, here's this drug, you're going to lose some weight. You have to talk to them about like how to do like a healthy balance of weight loss. So how are you going to eat? Like reducing fat consumption, because we know if someone still eats like a lot of fat or sits down and eats even when they feel full, I mean, it slows down your stomach emptying. So there's nowhere else for it to go but up, right? So I think that in general, like the patients that are getting the GERD, that are getting the vomiting, I mean, we really have to start talking to them about smaller, more frequent meals, having less fat at each meal. I think it's not just this great miracle drug that just drives weight loss. I mean, it kind of is, but at the same time, we still need to counsel on diet and lifestyle, which I think is the most important part, is really just making sure they understand how to tolerate the medication, how to use it successfully, and just in general, how to help them make their lives healthier.
Hmm.
So I would say those are the key. some of the key takeaways. And then for pharmacists, I think when we do switch from the Ribelsis pill to the Ozempic pill, just keeping in mind that 3 mg, 7 mg, and 14 will go over to the 1.5, 4, 9, and 25 mg doses. So really counseling patients, don't double up on the 1.5. It doesn't equal the 3. Like this is the new dose. So just keeping an eye out for just some of those potential confusion areas.
I think those are great points to highlight. And I do appreciate the cost considerations as well, because as you said, even though a lot of these are being promoted because their costs are coming down, the costs are still high for a lot of people, especially if there's no insurance or limited insurance coverage. And so cost, they're not going to work if people can't afford them, right? So we have to make sure
Yeah.
we can help navigate some of those too. Well, Christy, this has been awesome. We've chatted about so much, and I think that you had a lot of great takeaways and practical points for our listeners. I do want to wrap up with just maybe one game changer. It's our Game Changers podcast. So what would you say? You started out the conversation, I think, saying GLP-1s are sort of a game changer in and of themselves. But maybe is there anything else that you want to sort of drive home as a game changer for us to walk away with?
I mean, honestly, yeah, these are the game changers, right? I mean, for the first 10 years of my career, I managed people with diabetes with just insulin. And now my goal in life is to take everyone off insulin that has type 2 diabetes by using these and maintaining healthy diet and lifestyle. So in general, I think these are the game changers. But for us as pharmacists, I mean, the game changers are really just making sure we are the gatekeepers, making sure they know how to take these, making sure you're telling someone if they, because we talked about like the Wegovy pill is still not that cheap, right? So if they're going to pay for it, make sure they're taking it correctly. So 30 minutes before eating, drinking, taking any of their other medications, it's our job to make sure that people know how to take their medication appropriately and make sure that they can be successful with it. So while these medications are fantastic and they cover a plethora of disease states and show value across the board and across the spectrum, I think in general, it's also our job to make sure they're taking them appropriately. So
Absolutely. So they can get that benefit, right?
yeah.
And I think the other sort of takeaway for me is how much things are changing, how much we need to be keeping on top of it as pharmacists and staying educated on some of the updates because we want to be aware of these things before our patients are and able to handle some of these questions. So
Yeah.
definitely a moving target, but as much as we can, try to stay on top of any of those updates as they're coming out. So that was great, Christy. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me here today. I had a good time.
Excellent. Well, to wrap up our discussion, I do want to just make sure listeners know we do have a practice resource that will be going along with this topic on the CEimpact website. We talked about so many great things. I want to make sure you have a good summary of our takeaways for the podcast today. And so that will be on the CEimpact website for you to get along with the CE. And you can be sure to claim your CE credit on CEimpact.com. As always, have a great week and keep learning. And I can't wait to dig into another game-changing topic with you all next week.